heard the conventional view. Now prepare yourself to hear the other side. High school teachers Mike Marchison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Marchison and Spears.
Woo! Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side. I am one half of The Other Side, Justin Spears, joined as always by Mr. Mike Marchison. Mike, what is going on, man?
Well, I just want to say that I had read somewhere that like the average new podcast, like the number that people get to before they call it quits is 7. And so this being our 50th episode, that's pretty good. You know,
Yeah,
we said this was a bit over a year ago, but they say like 7. You know, a lot of people try this, and it is harder than it seems. I think we kind of realized that, but I just realized it's our 50th episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. That was something I kind of had on my radar as I was building everything in together is, we've been at this now, as Mike just said, for a little over a year. This is our 50th numbered episode. We've had a couple bonus shows that didn't get numbered in when I was going through the numbering conventions and everything. I just decided to title those as bonus episodes and whatnot. So I think all in all, we've probably put about 53 to 55 total episodes out over the course of this year. And I know we kind of had a stop there at the beginning with some scheduling. We've tried to be really consistent here over the course of the last couple of months and making sure that we get a weekly episode out to you guys. And we hope you're digging the show. I mean, I know we've tried to get it into some different avenues. We're on radio with WCVL out in Crawfordsville, Indiana. That really hopefully appeals to our geographic audience, 1550 AM out there. And we really appreciate, as I always say, Dave Peach and his group out there, Courtney Conkrite. She works really hard on getting the show loaded in every week, and we really appreciate the efforts that they give to us. We're just beyond humbled to be a part of the Cerberus Radio Network, which Suzanne Sherman, Mark Kreslins, Jeff Johnson, Dan Bailey. We've got the 10th Amendment Center podcast with Mike Meharry. We get the Shift Gold Report. That really is I think of it as like a hidden gem. Of course, if you're listening to political talk, there is, just a ton that you can go to. And I think for what our radio network, internet radio network offers for free, not behind a paywall, for free, the hours of content that you can get and what you can learn by listening to some of these shows, you're going to get a cross variety of things that Suzanne covers, from preparedness to hunting to her legal background. Jeff offers some great historical perspective in the paradigm shift. I mean, it's just really, I think, a great network. And I know we're trying to gain some traction over there as well. So we certainly appreciate that. And then our show, what we're trying to accomplish here, guys, is just to get people thinking. Mike and I, being high school educators, we see the apathy that is before us each and every day. And we just hate what's happening to our kids today. And, they just aren't really being encouraged to think about these topics that we're presenting. We do our part. We try. We're not perfect. We'll never claim to be, but we try to do our part to get these kids thinking critically and to get them to kind of consider some of these issues that we take on here. But that's really what this is all about. It's about a way in which hopefully, if you stumble upon this, and Mike, I didn't tell you this, but I had a couple of kids even here at the outset of the school year that have said, hey, I started subscribing to your podcast now that I've got you in class, and I started listening to it and everything. So, that's always encouraging to hear, because hopefully, again, that's just added time that they're hearing, what we're talking about, and it shows that they have an interest in it, and a passion for it. So, we're always, of course, looking to grow the show. So, likes, shares, comments, feedback, all of that stuff helps contribute with the SEO and everything online. So anything that you can do to help out in that regard certainly would be much appreciated on our end. We have a very, minimal budget for what we've been doing so far. And we're just trying to really keep it going, because we're doing this out of a passion and a love for the content and for communicating, what we think out to the public at large. And what a better platform than the internet. It has revolutionized the way that we can communicate with people. So yeah, that's a great point there, Mike. And listen, I appreciate the time and energy and effort that you put into the show as well.
Hey, likewise. It's funny you were mentioning as often as we talk about education, you're talking about the internet. I mean, the passion does come from where we are as educators. This is what we do, and the idea. I don't want to retread a whole bunch of old ground, but the idea that education cannot occur in these non-traditional grounds, I think we're pretty much stomping that one out too as we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important to keep in mind and understand as well. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun and it is it is not stressful, but it is at times, making it work, like we're doing it on a Sunday night because we both have very busy weeks coming up this week and everything. And but it's not really an added thing or just one extra thing. It's something that I've looked forward to all day today as I've kind of been prepping and kicking some things around and stuff. So all right. Well, having said all of that, let's go ahead and jump into our content for tonight. I put out a Facebook post and a Twitter blast on this and trying to kind of get people a little bit of a sneak peek into what we're going to be talking about here tonight. And we're calling this part one of a two-part series that we're going to be talking about. Recently, Mike and I have had a lot of conversations about, the goal of political dialogue. And we know that, when you start talking about historical, economic, government, current event issues, you typically are going to get, one of two responses. You're going to get somebody who's deeply passionate and on fire about it, and they're going to tell you and let you know about it. Or you're going to get the eye roll, the sigh, the crossed arms, the hands over the ears, couldn't care less about anything related to those topics there. And so, we've been talking a little bit about how we communicate our message, how we engage people in dialogue. And I brought up to Mike not too long ago, I said, here's what I've been kicking around in my mind as I read through my Facebook wall, my Twitter feed, and just engage with people. And it's this: what is the goal of dialogue? What is it that we want to accomplish as we engage with people, whether it be in a social media, digital platform, face-to-face around the dinner table with friends and family, in our communities, at work, at school, what have you? What should be the goal of this dialogue? And clearly, everybody who has an ideology, probably feels like they ascribe to that ideology because it is the best one or the true way or the right one, however you want to phrase that. And clearly we feel that way as well, right? I mean, I think Mike and I are fairly closely aligned on most political, economics, social issues, things of that nature. And really, I think the one word, if you were going to say, well, what is it? Right? What is it that you would ascribe to? We would both probably answer with freedom. Is that pretty accurate, Mike?
Liberty. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, liberty and freedom, right? And that means freedom from coercion, freedom from somebody telling you how to live your life, having the liberty to pursue what it is that you want to do, with the understanding that so long as you're not aggressing against another individual, and any interaction that you have with anyone would be voluntary. We've spelled that out before in the past, but I think it's good to revisit that here with this episode. So kind of getting that out of the way, right? Let's talk a little bit about then, okay, so as we are interacting with people, what should the goal be as we're explaining, right, that to others? And as I'm sure others try to, encourage or explain to us why they're right or wrong. And it kind of dawned on me that it really kind of comes down to one of two things, right? We're either trying to convert people into the camp that we're a part of, and there's a number of different ways that we've talked about doing that before, or is the goal more of, okay, I'm going to listen to what you have to say. Hopefully you'll listen to what I have to say. And we may agree to disagree, or we may be at an impasse. I'm okay with that, so long as you're not trying to force or coerce me to conform to your way of life. And that, I think, is a interesting proposition. So kind of throwing both of those out there, Mike, let's start with the idea of converting people. Where are you on that? I guess maybe talk to us a little bit about strategies, techniques, tactics that you think are successful with that, and how much emphasis should we be placing on truly trying to convert people to our ideology or way of life?
Yeah, that is a really tough one, because I am more of the mindset that I just want to be heard. And then conversion, again, if it were voluntary, would be secondary, and that would just kind of almost be like icing on the cake. But that's not really what I believe that I'm aiming for at the outset. Look, take this show for instance. Um, what we're trying to do for people is present a side of things, and this started largely as ideas in the academic ring. Stuff that we see in the social studies classroom, that where whether it's in the textbook or whether it's on the news or whether you go to a college lecture and hear it, there's really only one side of social studies, one side of history that you ever actually hear presented. And I don't think it was really our hope to convert anybody into seeing things our way, but rather just to let them know that there is another side out there. There's this kind of this side of history that has been suppressed. And one of the classic examples that you and I like to use, and this also was one of my favorite episodes, but the episode on Abraham Lincoln. There is a whole other side to his presidency and his tactics and his demeanor as a human being. Now, people might come out and say, well, why do you hate Abraham Lincoln? I don't hate Abraham Lincoln. I do hate the way that he's taught. It's almost, I don't want to rip off Tom Woods here, but it's like educational malpractice to just teach kids in this narrow one-dimensional path, or and that goes for society as a whole. So really, I my main objective is just to have people sit there with open ears and without at the top of their head, at the forefront of their mind, thinking this guy is a racist, sexist, homophobe. It's just all the stuff that you hear thrown out. Just it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. It doesn't matter what you say. That's just going to come pouring out. I just want people to sit there with open ears and just listen. And that's it. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I think that is really there are really some valid points in there. I think for me, as I reflect on this a little bit, um, I, I kind of I hesitate in using this parallel, although I did it with Mark Kreslins a couple of weeks ago when I was on the Suzanne and Mark show. I was filling in for Suzanne while she was on vacation, and I was drawing a lot of parallels between the way in which we communicate our beliefs, as whether you want to be, consider yourself full in the libertarian camp or somewhere between like a conservative libertarian or whatever, wherever you think you fall on the spectrum, wherever you're at, between, communicating that and trying to convert people there, and, being a believer in Christ and spreading the good word, and kind of going out and speaking to people about that. And we talked a lot about that because we've studied that a lot in my church that I attend. How do we take the word to people in the 21st century, in today's world where there's so much going on and things of that nature. And so I tried to draw some parallels there to that. I think I don't think I'm as forceful though with my political. I don't make it as much of a point when I'm talking to people as I might, when I develop a relationship. And I guess that's what I was getting at with all of that was, I think it's all about relationship building. I think you have to kind of gauge who it is that you're having the dialogue with, right? Does that make sense? So, I think as far as like, if you've got somebody in a captive audience position where, they're, maybe inquiring into you about something, versus if you're just trying to bash somebody over the head with a bunch of facts, I don't think you're going to be successful in that regard. How much time has been built into the relationship? How open are you to hearing what they have to say? I think all of those things factor in. But I guess what it all boils down to is, I think that, it's human nature to want people to see things the way that you do. Because, look, at the end of the day, if you're not trying to convert people, what are you saying? I think in a way you're kind of subtly kind of seeding that maybe what you believe isn't right or isn't the best way to live your life. Whether you want to talk about absolute or relative truths or not. But if you're to say, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe you shouldn't, think the way that I think, or maybe this isn't the best fit for you or whatever. Maybe there's a small part of somebody or you yourself that might, reflect on that and go, maybe what I'm doing is not right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, God, maybe I'm a little bit more, maybe I'm coming at this from a little bit more of a pessimistic stance than you are, because I feel like there is so little genuine dialogue in the world today, like
That's right.
actual genuine dialogue, that the first thing on my radar is just to have somebody listen. Because usually, I mean, people will be quiet while you're talking, but usually what they're doing is they're just waiting for their turn to talk.
Yeah.
They got their list and then they're waiting, but they're not actually listening. Like how often do you get people to actually sit and listen to you? And how often do you think, Justin, that a leftist will sit there with open mind and open ears and say, "Let me hear about libertarianism or right wing ideology, or whatever you want to call it, however we get labeled." I just don't think that happens almost at all. So I'm almost at a point where I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Like, listen first. I think if you listen, I do, and I think this is, again, going back to one of the reasons that we started this podcast. We got some valid points here. We have some good stuff. It just takes opening your ears first.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, when you start talking about the goal of communicating this to people, look, last week in our episode, I was just kind of not devil's advocate, but I guess I was just trying to, like, maybe beg people to listen to this from this regard. Is like, we were talking about the state of the economy, and I was trying to really drive home the point that, look, this is relevant to that blue collar factory worker who, maybe has never opened up a Wall Street Journal or read an article from, Forbes magazine, or even has any clue what the Dow Jones Industrial Average is, or what it's in his IRA, 401k, whatever it might be. This is still vitally important for somebody, that's just a middle American person, to take hold of and really dig into it and think about, right? Think about these things. Put some effort into stopping for just a moment, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, and reading through some articles, some journals, whatever it might be, and just being knowledgeable on these things, because they're important for you in your, daily life, but they're also important for you to know what's going on, for you to be able to talk to others about. And yeah, I think that going along with exactly what you said, most people aren't open-minded to hearing what you have to say. I think most people too, in that same vein, are just flat out lazy and don't really care to want to know. They're going to see the title of this or hear what the show is all about and just go, that's not about the Kardashians, I don't care. Or, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with Dancing with the Stars or the next Avengers movie or whatever it might be, and just put their head down in the sand and keep going on. So yeah, you're right. It works both ways. You've got to have people who are willing and able to be receptive to the message. And then you yourself also have to make sure that you're in tune with, how you're communicating the message as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say that I do think that our message is better. And I think, you were kind of alluding to that if you don't think that, there's probably something wrong with, either you or your internal thoughts but I think that our message is better. But one of the things that I think makes it better is what you said in your kind of like opening dialogue there. It is based 100% on volunteerism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think makes it better. This is why I want people to listen. And this is why ultimately I would like people to come around to more of a liberty mindset, because there is no coercion. And I think once you cede a little bit of your liberty to a coercive force, you might as well have ceded all of it, because that line is just about impossible to draw. I mean, impossible, and you're never going to get, large groups of people to agree on where it should be. And those people who you put in a power of coercion are going to use it, and they're just going to keep encroaching and encroaching and encroaching. And that's what we're seeing right now. And, when we take political stances like we take, the number one issue that we have, and I think I can speak for you on this, Justin, the number one issue that we have is that it's encroaching on liberty. That's it. It has nothing to do with people or economics or poor people or who wants to marry who or race. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It is a third party encroaching on our God-given liberties, the liberties that we were born with. And that's problematic. And we want those to be as numerous as possible. And I do think that that is a better position to take.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I agree with that 100%. And I just would wrap this up before we transition into the second point here by saying, and again, I'm guessing you probably feel this way as well on some things. I mean, listen, there are times where I have doubt. There are times where I question the positions that I support. And, as I read and engage in other libertarian minds and things, there's a lot of stuff that I don't agree with or that I hear and I kind of cock my head and go, that doesn't seem right to me. That's okay. Nobody wants groupthink. No, and I talked about this in my government class last week. I said, far too often we are falling into the groupthink mentality where we just buy hook, line, and sinker into whatever the mouthpieces of our parties or our factions or whatever you want to call them are advocating. And we hear it and we shake our heads like sheeple and mind-numbed robots, and somebody questions us on it. And we can't answer the question because we have no foundational basis for what we're doing. So I wouldn't want anybody to just, come around without really thinking about it. And in doing that, you're going to raise questions and doubts. And that's where, again, you just keep reading. You open up a book, you read a journal, you listen to a podcast, you do whatever it is, and it's either going to reassure you, right, or it's going to cause you to change your mind. And that's perfectly fine. There's no weakness to that. There's no admission of, hey, I was necessarily wrong for the way that I felt before. It could just be that you were introduced to a new set of facts that caused you to change your mind. So
we've both been through that. I mean, we've both been through that completely. We've talked about that on the show before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, well, having kind of kicked that around, let's look at this other option there then. So let's say for a moment that we set aside the idea of converting someone over to our worldview or way of thinking. Let's say that we were to say maybe a little bit less aggressive, I guess, way of dealing with it would be, hey, let's have conversation, let's have dialogue. But at the end of this, I'm going to be okay with you ascribing to whatever ideology it is. And now listen, I don't care if we're talking about, white power, Black Panthers, everything in between. Everything is open for people to believe in, right, in this regard. And I'm going to say I'm okay with that so long as you do not physically aggress me, harm me, or violate what we've talked about before as the non-aggression policy. So in other words, I'm not going to play mind control or police or anything like that. And this way would have us living in a country that would be very diverse in terms of thought, that would potentially allow for people to live within the same community that might have these, tendencies or ideologies, or as it was at the outset of the foundation of this country, we would naturally separate ourselves into groups of like-minded, thinkers. And you may have a township, a county, a state, whatever, political entity you want to go out to, where those people could congregate and say, hey, listen, I want to live in a, liberal utopia. I want Marx and Engels to be finally realized in its fullest form. I want to live in the people's, Republic of California. And so we're going to claim this geographic area here for that. And then, a couple hundred miles to the east, there is a state, Utah or Nevada or Wyoming or whatever it might be, which is a right wing, pure as the wind-driven snow community, very homogeneous. And, those people feel like they are the most superior form of people on this planet. But they're going to live in that area and they're not going to bother anybody else and they're going to keep to themselves. Now, I know people that are hearing this are quickly going to say that is lunacy. That would never happen. Both of those groups would eventually try to overtake one another for supremacy. And probably that human history tells us that would happen. But is that an option? What say you, Mike?
Well, yeah. I would love it that. Look, John Locke pointed this out in the 17th century. We have three rights: life, liberty, and property. And if I live all of my political and social views and my economic views come from this one basic point: don't infringe upon my life, liberty, and property. And we're fine. You can believe and say and do whatever you want. It makes no matter to me. But it's not just mine. Do not infringe. No person has the right to take somebody else's life, liberty, or property. You don't have the right. And that's as obvious as you don't have the right to just go over and murder your neighbor, because that would be taking their life. You don't have the right to enslave somebody and put them on a boat and bring them over to another continent and make them work, because that is an encroachment on their liberty. And you don't have the right to just go over and jump in somebody's car and take it, because that's taking their liberty. But it also goes to, we have to leave people alone, and if we are in a position where we begin to think that, our thought process or our version of society, socio-political views are correct and yours are incorrect, and we're going to start imposing our way on you, then we've completely lost our way. It has to go back to just protecting these three things. And if you live your life that way, I think it becomes a whole lot clearer.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that kind of strikes me as I've been thinking through this a little bit today is the slippery slope that gets created when you advocate for unity, right, in unified message and belief system. And certainly we see this in its rapid growth over the latter half of the 1900s into the 2000s now. And that is this idea of conformity, right? The word tolerate has been bastardized so badly in the way that it means to tolerate or to show toleration towards somebody. It's not even close to what it really should mean, which is exactly what we're laying out here, and that is the idea that, hey, if you want to be a Wiccan and be my next door neighbor, I'm not going to be threatened by that. I'm going to let you live the way that you do, so long as you accurately pointed out you're not violating my life, liberty, and property. You're not physically harming me. You're not destroying my property, whatever. Now, oftentimes we feel threatened by people's thoughts. We feel threatened by their way of life, but it's completely preposterous to say that we should make somebody conform to the way that we want to live simply because we're scared or afraid of what it is, that the way that they're living their life. And the fact that maybe somebody else of that ilk has committed atrocities, therefore that means you're going to do it. Really? Think about how quickly that can go the other way and give government the authority to come in and say, you can no longer be a Muslim. You can no longer be a Christian. You can no longer be a Hindu. You can no longer, eat meat. You have to be a vegetarian. You can no longer, do this, that, and the other, because that way of life threatens. And if that sounds preposterous, guys, we're headed there. We are headed there. We are hearing people talk about how these microaggressions and racist to do this and it's homophobic to believe that. And it's just unbelievable to see the direction that we're headed in, all because of the idea of conformity to a certain way of life. So I think that brings up some valid points that I'd like to carry over into our bonus discussion. Mike, before we wrap up, did you have any other comments or input here?
No, I should have got to, but I wanted to get to an imposition on people's property. Obviously, is taxation. We've talked about that a lot before, but where I was kind of going with that is there are obvious ways that you can infringe upon somebody's life or liberty by either stealing their stuff or taking them. But we have a government right now that has laid claim to, 1/3 to 40% of my paycheck, and there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, there's just like literally nothing I can do about it. And there are people in this country who call me heartless, cruel, racist, whatever, because I want to keep the actual property that I've worked for and that I've earned, that I don't want to have more of it coercively and forcibly taken away. And I think this goes all the way back to what we talked about in the beginning. How can we have a dialogue if that's the starting point? If me wanting to keep my property, which is a natural God-given right that I have, makes me some sort of hateful person, I think we have to start to get beyond that.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for our radio audience. So for those of you listening on 92.1 1550 WCVL or WCVL AM, thank you for joining in. Again, we would love to hear any feedback or questions or comments that you have for us about the show. You can always feel free to lob those over our way via our social media. On Facebook, you can search for The Other Side Podcast, or you can find me, Justin Spears 4, if you search on Facebook or on Twitter, or you can email us Margison and Spears, all one word, at gmail.com. So again, thank you so much. We look forward to you to join us next week, where we cover part 2 of this series on the truth in what we make claims to. So I'm looking forward to that. Until then, we will see you on the other side. For those of you listening online, we will carry our bonus content here in just a moment. All right, Mike, I would love to pick back up with where you just left off there. I think that is a really, really valid point that oftentimes doesn't get talked about a whole lot in this conversation. Now, look, we have obviously tried to lay out here a way in which we address dialogue as hopeful of converting. So long, I think it's really important, because if you're listening there, you might say, well, it sounded like you were saying you shouldn't be converting people because then you'd be coercing them. But you said it, and it's 100% needs to be reiterated, voluntary, right? I mean, we're definitely not advocating for going around and being the thought police and telling people they need to convert or, whatever. But that it be voluntary, that people come to the conclusions to come to on their own by simply hearing a presentation of the facts here. But going back to what you were mentioning and talking a little bit about the notion of what government does, right? Because we can't leave, they're not, they're culpable in a lot of this as well. And that is the idea of the taking of tax dollars, because if they didn't, who would pay for the roads? Who would pay for the schools? How would we have all of these things, healthcare and military and things of that nature? So
nobody but a government official could figure out that two people want to get from one place to another, right? I mean, humans couldn't figure that out on their own without a government.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess maybe chat us up now that we got a little bit more time here with the bonus time here. Chat us up a little bit on that more in detail there, because I like what you were referring to there when you were talking about the idea of not having, a choice, essentially, right? I mean, I was telling my government kids this earlier last week. I said, when you guys took a part-time job somewhere, yeah, I know you signed your W-2s and you do all your 1040s and everything like that, but did you really have a choice in any of that? And did you really have a choice into where your money goes and how it's allocated and how much of it they want to take. And I said, this is just income stuff too. Think about sales tax and food, all these other forms of taxes that we pay. And it really kind of got the wheels turning a little bit with them. So, talk a little bit more about how that can be seen maybe a little bit as aggression by the state.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly not voluntary, because your only other option is to live your life in a cage, a big metal cage that they put you in. So those are the two options that they give you. But I think the larger point is that we are in a generation now where this has just become normalcy, and people don't really see it as, I guess not enough people see it as coercion. And if you look at things through John Locke's lens, like I brought up there a few minutes ago, that every human being is entitled to their life, their liberty, and their property, then that means no other human beings are entitled to it. And we tend to talk about the government as though it's this thing, this like existential being or institution, and it's not. It's just people. These are other people grabbing your money, taking it for themselves, and say, we know better how to spend this than you do. We need to build a road, because if we didn't, there would be no roads. Well, that's just stupid. I mean, that's ridiculous. And then they go on and they tell us, well, this is for the greater good, and they'll never fully define what the greater good is. And even so, why is it their definition of what the greater good is and not mine? And if we don't start having these conversations, and I'm really glad that you brought this to me last week as a topic that you wanted to come out here, because we need to talk about it more. If we don't start having these conversations about how far are we willing to let the government go, then we might as well just go ahead and cede all of our life, all of our liberty, and all of our property, and essentially just become slaves to the entire system. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's scary is there's a growing number of people that are okay with that.
When you see that, when you see these polls where millennials actually favor social, okay, those polls are misleading, because they don't know what socialism is, because they don't know what capitalism is, and they don't know history. Like, that's the problem with millennials. Mm-hmm. They are by far the dumbest generation ever in recorded history, ever at any point. They don't know anything. So when they take these polls and they say, do you favor this? All you might as well just be asking them, do you like free stuff? Yes or no? That's all they're answering. That's all they're actually responding to. But I think there are a growing number of apathetic people who are just, we see it in the polls, they are willing to just cede for whatever reason. You bring it up a lot too. You say, because they just put their heads down and they look at, okay, what is on Snapchat right now? Mm-hmm. What is on television right now? And you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, liberty is hard. Liberty and freedom are very difficult things. We've done whole episodes on that before. We've talked about how hard it was to live in the freest time in this country, where there was very little to no government assistance and interference. I mean, it was an era of great growth, but it didn't happen easily. And so many times today, if people don't get results in an instantaneous, easy manner, they just get frustrated, throw their hands up, and look for somebody else to solve the problem. One other thing that I wanted to mention, Mike, and I'm so glad you said this too. I kind of had this on my radar a little bit. You were talking about the government as an institution, and really it's just people. Because when we were talking earlier about ideologies and worldviews, one of the things that we are constantly bombarded with, and this is one of those areas too where I see some disagreement within libertarian communities on policing. There is a very, very strong anti-police presence within the Libertarian Party. Some of the stuff that I see on my Facebook feed related to police is downright disrespectful. Whether you agree or disagree with the way law enforcement operates, and I know we all have cop jokes, and we get frustrated with the way that they do things from time to time. But listen, at the end of the day, police are not racist, because there is no such thing as police. There are people that wear a uniform that are sworn to protect and serve. but that is it. At the end of that, it is a person. Only a person can have those feelings and thoughts. A job called policeman cannot be racist. And you see this, you have to look no further than there was a viral video. I don't know how old it is, if this is relatively new or not, but I saw it over the weekend of a black cop that was beating another black citizen while another black cop stood by and watched. And it was interested to kind of listen to and see some of the dialogue related to that, because I wanted to hear or see somebody point that out, and nobody did. It was all about the pig, the cop, the worthless this, the worthless that, and just all this like anti-authoritarian rage, and nothing about the idea of, hold on, wait a second here. This is a black person beating another black person. Yes, he's wearing a uniform. Maybe he went across the line. I don't know. You only see a snippet of the video, but there's just no acknowledgement from anybody about the fact that, this isn't a white cop beating a black person, because that doesn't fit the narrative.
Or, I mean, there are, I'm sure, lots of videos of white cops beating white
people. Yeah, exactly.
White criminals out.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So, just those kinds of things, I think, for me, and this is going to segue us into what we're going to talk about next week. And this is really why I wanted to do this as a 2-part series, because I think this is going to transition really well into what we'd like to talk about next week. Nobody talks about these things. Right? Nobody takes time, because everybody's so caught up in the emotion of what's happening. Nobody hits the pause button and even dares to bring up and say, wait a second, if the narrative is cops are racist and they will only take out aggression if it's a white cop, black man, or black cop, white man, or whatever the scenario may be, wait a second here. Why is this happening? Just even asking that question, let alone having a discussion about it, right? Because then what that would naturally lead you to hopefully understand, which I tried to point out a second ago, is that people, right? It's a person. People are fallible. They're sinful. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to err. Yes, they're going to abuse their power. No different than a boss at a corporate company is going to abuse his authority in some way, shape, or form. It happens in all forms of life. Now, yes, maybe it's a little bit more public when it's law enforcement that's doing it. But at the end of the day, it's not law enforcement that is acting that way, because that casts a blanket on every person in law enforcement. Clearly not every person that wears uniform is like that. And at the end of the day, as I said, there is no thing that naturally exists called a police officer that can have these emotions or express these things. It's the person in the uniform.
Well, that's a great point. And the same thing can be said about Republicans and or Democrats. A Democrat can't harbor this view. Only a person can harbor this view, and Republicans can't. So I think that's a really important point, that we are human beings, and when we tend to, I don't know, just brush with these broad strokes, it debases and devalues the dialogue that we actually need to be having. This very, very necessary dialogue, which, I mean, there's just like this drought of dialogue in the country, and we're thirsting for it, and we can't get it when you're painting large groups of people this way, because then it just causes people to either shut down, turn away and say, I don't want to have a debate with you, or get really defensive and then just start firing back in the same manner, and nobody ever gets anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so vitally important that we address it from the beginning. And by that, what I mean, just to clarify, is going back to those foundational questions, right? And so just to kind of give you a little bit of a sneak peek as to what we may be talking about next week when we go into this, I was telling Mike off air before we came on today, the one thing that you hear about it a lot now is the Medicare for all. And, people having conversations about, is healthcare a natural right? No, they're not talking about that. What are they talking about? They're talking about the cost. They're just jumping in right in the middle of this dialogue, and they're so caught up and enamored about the cost and everything. No one is even taking time to say, hold on, wait a second. Is healthcare a natural right? Now, Mike, I know as you point out, Bernie Sanders talked a little bit about that in his campaign. And so there was a little bit of dialogue there, but very little in the way of, when you're talking about this again around the water cooler or with your family, that's where you need to start the conversation. You need to stop getting sucked into talking about the distraction of, well, where's the funds going to come from? Yeah, I know that's an important thing, once we get there, but we need to be having a conversation about, is this something that the government should even have their hands on first before we talk about where are we going to fund it from? You could say the same thing about income inequality, where you hear people all the time talking about the 1% and income inequality and things of that nature. I was telling you that there was a story that I saw about a woman working for Amazon who was living out of her van. And there was a sob story from the Sanders campaign about Bezos is on his 12th mansion and this woman's living in her van. And oh my goodness, oh, the humanity. And people are going to hear that and they're going to get very emotional about it. But they're not going to stop to think for a second about, well, why is Bezos in the position that he's in? And why is this lady in the position that she's in? And I'm not even talking about like currently. I'm talking about what led them to get to where they are right now. Those are our talking points. Those are things that conversations we've got to have. And you were talking about the dialogue and needing it so desperately. You're absolutely right. But we've got to make sure that we're going about it from the beginning and setting the facts of what we're talking about first before we start getting into these things that I think are mere distractions to the real problems at hand.
Yeah, and let me just bring up that when Bernie Sanders did mention this idea about healthcare being a human right, there was no dialogue because he just said there was, and then there was no pushback. I mean, of course, when he was getting interviews, there were these softball interviews, but somebody asked him, they said something along the lines of, where does this right to healthcare come from? And he said, from being alive, from being a human being. And the whole crowd started clapping, and then they just moved on to the next question. And I was sitting there thinking, you got to be kidding me. Wait, that's it?
Yeah.
You're not going to ask him a follow-up or anything like that? Or whoa. Do you know what natural rights are? Do natural rights involve you being able to take something from somebody else and give it to a third party? I mean, we have to at least discuss this. So yeah, you're right. I'm looking forward to next week's conversation.
Yeah, I think that hopefully will be a good one. I'm looking forward to it too. So,
and then the presidents, we're going to do the presidents after that. So people listening, we have like weeks of good stuff coming up. Next week, we're going to continue this episode, and we're going to talk a little bit about this Medicare for all and these conversations that we need to have. And then we're going to start a pretty cool series on a number of different presidents, some that you've heard of and are familiar with, and then some that you may have heard the name, but you just don't know a whole lot about. And I think people are going to enjoy this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a really great way to hit on the roots of what you were talking about with the show, which is the other side. These things get taught in classes and get talked about in our lives in ways in which we just, consider it settled science or, the gospel or whatever. And we never even stop to think about or even examine, the full picture of these presidents that we're going to be discussing and talking about. So I'm really looking forward to that series. I think that's going to be a really fun and challenging way to get to learn, me more personally about some of these presidents as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. All right. Well, that's going to wrap us up for this episode. Again, we really appreciate the support that we get out there from our listeners. As I always say, make sure that you are sharing, liking, commenting. All of that stuff really goes a long way to helping us out. Of course, if you have any questions, pushback, anything along those lines, please feel free to communicate that to us as well in one of the many ways that you can reach us. Don't forget about our sister group, the Cerberus Radio Network, that we're a part of. Again, very excited to be a part of those guys. You can catch our episodes over there. Get us on iTunes, Google Play, the Spreaker Radio app, our YouTube page. I mean, there's just numerous ways that fits your lifestyle best for listening to the show. And again, thank you guys so much for being out there. Until next week, you have now heard The Other Side.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you're not fully informed until you've heard The Other Side.